It starts in the middle of a perfectly normal afternoon. A toddler drops a toy, or an infant refuses to sleep, and out of nowhere, a sudden rush of panic washes over the parent. The heart races, the breathing gets shallow, and anger flares up. The body acts as if it's fighting for survival, even though the actual threat is just a tantrum in a shoe store. Psychiatrist Dr. Daniel J. Siegel wanted to know exactly what happens inside the nervous system during these overwhelming moments. Drawing from his clinical practice at UCLA and background in pediatrics, he looked past standard advice to examine the physical architecture of the brain. These explosive moments represent the symptoms of a hidden neurobiological short circuit. While it looks like a reaction to the child's behavior, the actual event is happening deep inside the parent's own brain. Every time this short circuit happens, a familiar fear sets in for the caregiver, the worry that they are trapped in a cycle, destined to repeat the exact mistakes their own parents made. Siegel identifies the fuel for these cycles as unresolved issues. These are specific, unprocessed emotional experiences left over from a parent's own early years. They can sit perfectly dormant for decades, but the moment a child acts in a way that mirrors the precise conditions of that early distress, like showing intense separation anxiety, the parent's nervous system is ambushed. Breaking this cycle requires more than managing a child's behavior. A parent has to physically untangle the neurobiology of their own history. To see how this untangling works, we have to look at how the brain files away our life experiences. It uses two completely separate systems. The conscious side is explicit memory. It handles the logical, linear recall of facts, dates, and the clear autobiographical stories we actively choose to retrieve. Right beside it is a primitive archive we are born with called implicit memory. This system doesn't record stories. It strictly stores raw bodily sensations, reflexes, and pure unconscious feeling. Severe unresolved distress bypasses the logical files entirely. It gets locked away strictly as implicit memory, a potent cluster of physical fear with zero conscious context attached to it. When a modern-day trigger occurs, like that baby crying in the living room, it immediately reactivates that dormant file. The nervous system gets hijacked by the past. In this state, the parent relives the physical sensation of their childhood trauma, effectively replacing the reality of the present moment with a historical sensory experience. This internal hijack physically alters how the brain operates in real time, severing the connection between its two hemispheres. The right hemisphere serves as the emotional processing center. It takes in the holistic picture of a situation and houses those deeply rooted implicit feelings. The left hemisphere is the structural counterpart. It relies on language and logic to organize information into a linear, manageable sequence. A healthy response relies on a state called integration. This is the seamless communication between the logical left and the emotional right to accurately evaluate whatever is happening in the room. But during a trigger, that massive flood of implicit memory overwhelms the right hemisphere. The sudden surge of emotional data overloads the connecting circuits. The logical left brain is forced completely offline. Reason and language shut down, stranding the parent entirely in the unreasoning, emotional right hemisphere. This overreaction represents the physical moment the brain loses its structural ability to communicate with itself, leaving the parent stranded in a historical emotional storm. Restoring that communication requires a targeted neurobiological cure, creating what Siegel calls a coherent narrative. A coherent narrative forces the logical left brain to wake up and do its job. By deliberately using language to articulate past distress, the left hemisphere builds structural bridges back into the chaotic right hemisphere. This act of storytelling rewires the physical structure of memory, dragging a dangerous, unconscious implicit memory into the light and converting it into a safe, understood explicit memory. The process is demanding. It asks a parent to stop dismissing their triggers and instead conduct a rigorous, often uncomfortable inventory of their own early life to locate the original source of the panic. Developing this internal understanding physically rewires the brain's architecture, restoring the structural capacity for emotional control. Once those pathways are rebuilt internally, the effects begin to materialize externally, right in the middle of the living room. When a caregiver operates with an integrated brain, a spilled cup of milk no longer signals a crisis. Instead of panicking, they can sit calmly with a distressed child and use narrative to help them process the minor accident. By maintaining this grounded, logical state, the parent acts as an external anchor, actively regulating the child's still developing nervous system. Breaking the cycle of generational trauma requires the courage to investigate these internal reactions directly, rather than simply attempting to hide them. Healing the physical neurobiology of your own unresolved past is the precise mechanism required to secure your child's emotional future.